we have been on a I don't know how to pronounce that word, hiatus, for a few weeks, but we are restarting with a great set of readings, and the first new session is on Monday the 19th. So if anybody of you is interested in attending that session or the following sessions, if this is a short notice and you can't make it to that, if you tick on the appropriate circle then you can get those emails and then I can say.
Sure.
Yeah, that would work.
I would just add to that, it was my first reading. The last time we did it, it was a lot of fun.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
He was not paid to just say that.
Spontaneous.
Yeah, he was not paid to say that. That came out completely spontaneously. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I'll take my payment outside.
So also we have an open submission journal called the Platypus Review, and that's available around campus. And I think there's some copies. Are there copies at the back of the room? If not, I will put some there at the end of this. And yeah, the final thing we have are panels like tonight. So yeah, there's a sign-up sheet going around, so if you want more information on future events we're having, then you should sign up for that. So tonight's panel is What Are Elections for the Left? It's the first panel we have this semester, and it was originally formulated for the Platypus European Conference taking place in Frankfurt next month. But with the Canadian federal election so close, we thought it would be a good idea to launch it in Halifax. So before I introduce the panelists, yeah, I'm just going to do a brief introduction, kind of a lead off for this. Okay, so during the 19th century, suffrage rights were widened in the heart of capital, confronting political radicals with the question of whether and how elective officials and how elective offices could be used to achieve revolutionary aims. Since that time, differences of opinion on how to approach electoral politics have been at issue throughout the left's most fundamental splits. The break between Marxism and anarchism, the apparent capitulation of international social democracy to world war, the struggle for the legacy of the Russian Revolution, to capitalist stabilization and the apparent apathy to politics that would characterize our time. Since the early 20th century, such splits have attended the decline of the left rather than its ascendancy, forcing recent generations of marginalized radicals to grapple with an impossible choice. Either a realistic electoral compromise with the status quo, often couched in the logic of lesser evilism, or a sectarian electoral purism doomed to irrelevance, often inspired by fidelity to once revolutionary correct positions. This impasse guarantees a hearing for those who, like many Occupy movement activists, advocate a principled abstention from electoral politics. In the present moment, there seems to be a shift back from popular mobilization and movement building to electoral strategies and parliamentary representation. Although previously social movements severely criticized existing parliamentary democracy, the idea of facilitating radical causes through electoral politics and campaigns has recently gained prominence. So in Canada, there has been the NDP that's experienced a resurgence, not only federally, but also their victory in Alberta. In Europe, the debt crisis has seen the rise of Syriza. In Greece, Podemos in Spain, and in the victory of Jeremy Corbyn in the leadership of the Labour Party in the UK. Moreover, you've got Bernie Sanders as an avowedly social democrat.
I think he called himself a democratic socialist, didn't he? I forgot what this thing was.
That's what he calls himself. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
some
what he calls himself.
distinction there, but I forgot what it is.
So each of the panelists have been asked to consider this description and 4 questions in formulating opening remarks. The guidelines for tonight are that panelists will have 10 to 12 minutes for opening remarks. Brendan in the back there can discreetly signal when the panelists are at 10 minutes, and also when they have a minute to go, and then when they need to wrap up at 12 minutes. And after that initial thing, there'll be opportunities for very brief responses by the panelists. So that's 3 minutes where you can respond to the other panelists. And then we can open it up for Q&A, and I hope it will be a nice, lively discussion.
No fist fights, please.
Yes, no fist fights. So yeah, we're planning on concluding at 9 p.m., but it might go a bit later. Okay, so in introduction. So I'm going to start with Shirley. So Shirley Tillotson was born and raised in Nova Scotia, the daughter of transplanted prairie CCFers. Her first university degree, a Bachelor of Independent Studies earned in 1978, is from an alternative academic program that was founded at the University of Waterloo in the 1960s. She worked for several years in a worker-owned graphics firm in Kitchener, Ontario, and during most of the 1980s for various commercial graphics firms in Vancouver. And while she was a graduate student in Kingston, Ontario, she was a volunteer in a feminist anti-rape collective. As a historian at Dalhousie, she has researched and written about community organizations and politics of various sorts in Canada, mainly in the period of 1920 to 1970. Her current project, a nearly finished book, is called The Power to Govern, Taxation and Democracy in Canada, 1917 to 1971. And her Gamberg, over on the right, is a retired professor of sociology at Dalhousie, where he taught classes on Marx and Marxism. He is also a well-known figure of the Halifax left, extending back to the 1970s, where he participated in the Halifax Study Group. And he's currently working on a book called Marxism After Marx. And Madelaine worked as a student with the revolutionary student movement to bring democratic general assemblies to campus. After dropping out of school, she became a SALT organizer with co-workers within her workplace. This last year, she worked with the Proletarian Feminist Front on a street sex ed campaign to spread information about contraception, STI prevention, and consent to Catholic high school teens. The Proletarian Feminist Front has also been fighting to shut down the anti-abortion March for Life and men's rights activists in Ottawa. Most recently, she has been organizing for the boycott campaign of the elections and an initiative of the PCR-RCP. There is information on these initiatives at the back, and Madelaine will be hosting an information session tomorrow at the Kellogg Library.
Tell people what the RCP is.
The Revolutionary Communist Party. It's going to be at 5 p.m.
Thanks. Yeah, so if it's okay, we'll start with Shirley.
All right. Thank you. Welcome. Greetings. In 1935, Sir Robert Laird Borden, who had been the Prime Minister of Canada during World War I, had managed to run an election in 1917 that was essentially an anti-French Canadian election, so not my favorite guy in the world. He was by then out of politics, but still interested in what was going on. And he wrote to the then finance minister, who was just about to be booted out of office, Edgar Rhodes, and said to Rhodes, he was worried about what was going to happen if the Roosevelt New Deal collapsed and the United States was essentially blackballed by international lenders. He said the U.S. loses its credit as a result of Roosevelt's New Deal. This outcome will find 6 million workers unemployed, he said to Rhodes. Unemployed and destitute, and they will not consent to starve. So here's someone who's hardly a man of the left, who sees the decisions made by elected public figures as ones that, if they get it wrong, will create such misery that there's going to be deep, deep chaos. And it's worrying him. I tell this story because, this is not, showboating that he's doing. It's something he's writing to a friend, an insider, a political insider to an insider. And I wonder if those conversations in some way still go on in the welfare state. sometimes I think I heard echoes of it in Syriza and Alex Tsipras's rhetoric. And Varoufakis, when he came back from Europe, saying, these people don't care. I thought, oh boy, you don't have a threat that's credible to them in a way that for Borden, the threat of mass, unorganized popular insurrection seemed real. So I do think that it's in the job description of politicians to worry about social control. Social control in a kind of conservative sort of way. Conceivably, though, social control in more justice-oriented way. And so it's for that reason, in some ways, that I think I do still take some kind of electoral process seriously. But the work that politicians do to practice social control can vary in its effects in ways that either one might on the left with an interest in equality, fairness, freedom, health, safety for everyone might endorse, or social control that might not, in fact, produce those results. So I thought that what I wanted to say before I return to the sort of theme of kinds of social control is how the particulars of Canadian institutional life, in terms of how government works, shapes what an election is, what's going on there, right? I don't think elections are opinion polls. That is, I don't think they're actually a way of telling what people think, because the question's a pretty blunt one. It's not a deliberative democracy process. The kinds of good conversations that people who think democracy consists in giving reasons and having an exchange about real matters of substance doesn't happen in an election campaign. And I don't think, particularly in Canada, that elections are a contest between left and right. Canadian electoral institutions produce centrist parties. It's not that we as Canadians are centrist. It's that parties have to take into account region, subnational politics of an important kind and identities. There's the first past the post problem. There's so much going on in those Big Tent parties that left and right gets lost. And it ends up becoming this kind of mushy, incoherent, what two things can we agree on as a group of people conversation. I don't think that's as true in American politics. I think the greater free agency of American congressmen and women and Senate representatives actually provides points of purchase for more ideological politics. But ours doesn't. And so why bother? If what you want to do is advocate a left position, why would you feed anything into this homogenizing stomach of an institution, a political party? I think it is really only one, and maybe a small one, of the things that people on the left can do. I think the real work of the left probably is in the sorts of community organizations that Madelaine has described. But certainly when I was in that kind of organization, a place where I felt I was getting some kind of meaningful exercise of my views in a way that when I volunteered for the NDP, I didn't really feel was the case. But I do think that in terms of engaging in a left-wing project of social control, because there is, reading Ian Mackay's book on the early 20th century left, there is something in the left is a project of social control. That is creating solidarity, getting people to do something together, exerting some kind of control on the out-of-control exploiters and abusers of human beings. That's a project of social control. Now, what's that got to do with elections? Because elections are a place where you articulate, in preferably a poetic, expressive, important, moving, passionate way, a view of a basis of unity, a kind of solidarity. Typically, we don't see that, a particularly impressive version of that. But I really do think that if electoral democracy is anything, it's platforms on which you can say a convincing, moving sort of weave. When we don't like Harper saying things about, the cab wearers aren't Canadians, I would suggest that we object to his exercise in social control. We object to the kind of project of we that's being produced in that statement. I'm not myself, and this is why I say I'm on the right of the left, I'm not particularly fond of revolutionary rhetoric. It's another kind of we. It creates armed camps, which have rarely been good for women, if I put on my feminist hat for the moment. Common economic interest is another method of articulating a we. There's a kind of a maple syrup vacuous Canadianism, which always risks racism. And then there's the we that I think is the we of most people on the left. I may be wrong, but a we of care and reason and reflection and statement that what we are as voters are people who are decent and smart. We are testifying as we vote to our awareness of the suffering of others, our awareness of injustice. And if that's what a politician can say our vote means when they speak from the platform, then they're doing a work of social control through a kind of political rhetoric that I think needs to be done. And so that's what I think participating in elections for.
So we'll move on to Herb next.
I think I'll take a wider historical view of the problem. Because I started asking myself, what does it mean to be left? What is the left anyway? Is there a definitive way you could say some policy of who the people are left? Or is left itself a historical project? That is, does what left change all the time? And indeed it does change all the time. What is left now is different from what is left 10 years ago. What is left in the 19th century, which Anthony was talking about, is very different from what it is today. And that means you have to really look at the particular context in which elections happen when you ask about what the left can or should do. Now, again, broadly speaking, talking for the socialist left, and I speak for the socialist left not because it has any chance of taking power. Never has it had less chance of taking power in developed capitalism. I speak for that because I come from a position, a tradition, an outlook that says that capitalism is a rotten system. It's the most constructive system in human history. The fact that we're all sitting here warm and still alive compared to pre-18th century life is quite amazing. Do you know that little fact? It took us long to get from Rome to Paris in the year of Christ as it did in the year 1800. Which means there's been no change in movement for 18 centuries, and I have to compare today. Our lifespan is longer. And if you ever want to romanticize at least the feudal past, which I'm sure some of you have faced with the classicist and foundation year program, romanticization of the feudal past, if not of Athens, they also give you a sense of this warm solidarity place. I recommend a great movie, called A Lion in Winter, with Peter O'Toole and Catherine Hepburn. And one scene in that movie, which is about King Henry II, I don't know all the monarchies you see in the United States. We don't know monarchies. We only learn generals who win battles, and we forget the ones who lose. I say we, they do. I'm not we there at all. But one of the scenes in this movie about King Henry is he gets up in the morning in this castle, which is freezing, freezing. He's wearing a thing over his shoulder which looks like a dead rat. And he goes over to a place to wash. And he kicks the chickens out of the way in his so-called bedroom, and then breaks the ice with his hand in order to wash up. Now, if you want to romanticize that, you can. But that's what life was like. And the life of King Charlemagne was 10 times worse than even the life of you poor students. And I'm not saying you aren't miserable, you are. But the type of misery that was faced by people pre-capitalism is quite, it wasn't unprecedented, it was ordinary. In that sense, Marx's statement in the manifesto, where he says that capitalism makes the pyramids of Egypt look like child's play, is quite right. We do live in the most constructive, most advanced type of society, talking technically and scientifically, in world history. And that is because of capitalism, capitalist industrialization. On the other hand, capitalism is the most destructive system in human history. Never have more people been killed by the technology of this advanced system. Never have more people been threatened by that. Never has the whole species been threatened at its very level of sustainability by capitalism. So therefore, and only a basic change in the economic mode of production can change all that. Therefore, since I reached the age of reason, about the age of 35, we grew up very, very slowly in the system. I've been a socialist. So therefore, I'll talk about that point of view with regard to elections for the moment. There are two major positions. Murray actually handed you whoever wrote that introduction, right? If you wrote it, it's a good one. Mentioned the shift in 1914 from, I'm talking about socialist politics, the shift in socialist politics in 1914 from those who believe that parliamentary elections done slowly, and certainly will, in a deterministic sense, in a scientific deterministic sense, will lead to socialism, and therefore all attempts to talk about overthrow capital is simply pie in the sky. And it was Edward Bernstein who said, along with this, the epigram which defended this point of view, the movement is everything, the end is nothing. Therefore, we'll drop the very end of the name socialism and just go at the movement to make things better by being elected to parliament. This is a kind of electoral fetishism, by the way, which is worldwide. Not only the Social Democrats at that time believed that. And out of that came a split in 1914 because the fetish, and by the way, that fetishism is more than just in our world. It is worldwide now. The Egyptian kids in the streets, the Egyptian young people in the streets considered that if they would have a modern election, they would be free. And they would have a better life. They were wrong, but they believed that, and that is deep. The Chinese now, who live in a society which used to be socialist and now far from socialist, they now believe if only we had a multi-party democracy, and that's fed by most academics, by the way, they go to a political science department, they say what China lacks is now getting rich, and I think that what they don't have is our marvelous multi-party democracy. We all know, this is rather left-wing, multi-party democracies are frauds. Frauds. They don't ever bring the left to power. In fact, they become a basis by which it legitimates the control of economic power, as Bernie Sanders said last night in the debate. So that split between the parliamentary road to socialism and the revolutionary road became the dividing line. Now, I have this to say about that relative to elections. The parliamentary vote made parliamentary democracy into a principle, and it said any other way is unacceptable. In fact, any other way will lead to Joseph Stalin, they would say now. Any other way will lead to Stalin. The revolutionary side said, and important, that the problem of elections is contextual. It's not, in principle, we do not believe that elections can be made into a fetish, because capital is a kind of system which is quite capable of killing us if we go too far. And the killing can be done ideologically. You should see a wonderful documentary called A Very British Coup. A Very British Coup. A documentary about, it's fictionalized, about the election of a socialist power in England and what the ruling class does to him. Right? And we go into many cases today where socialists become elected and they even bring in a socialist program like Allende did in Chile. And he died by his own sword because he refused to believe that the army, the professional army coming from old regime, refused to believe that they were not neutral. And they and the CIA killed him. And Zhou Enlai, the Chinese premier, made a very interesting response to Allende's death. He said, Allende is a wonderful socialist. We shall all learn from his experience. Meaning we shall learn we shouldn't do it that way anymore. But we cannot make the electoral process into the only principle of socialist power. I take these principles for granted myself. Now we get to the point of the present day context of elections, which is very different now. Because if I'm saying that elections are contextual, and whether you vote on them or not, and who you vote for, is a product of what we face, not whether we're super revolutionaries or whether we're not revolutionary, etc. But if we're on the left means that you look at what the present conditions are, and you ask yourself, do we still vote? If we vote, who we vote for? Will we hope to come of this? What do you do afterwards? Right? That's what we'll do here, hopefully, because that's what we're here for, to talk about the Monday's election. Okay? Done.
Okay, so just in case I run out of time, I'm going to summarize everything I'm going to say first. So I have 3 main points that I'm going to try to be making tonight. First of all, I want to make the point that electoral parties in politics, in our current conditions, are absolutely worthless and counterproductive to revolutionaries. And I am going to make a distinction between revolutionaries and the left. Second of all, the working class and other marginalized people have already acknowledged this fact, and they've already made the decision to not vote in capitalist elections. And third, our job as revolutionaries is now to unite and organize these people and to turn their principled inaction into revolutionary action. Okay, so the first question that was asked in the summary that you lovely folks made was, what does it mean for the left to take power? To be frank, it doesn't mean anything. The left could list you off a billion different ways of how it's going to take power, because the left is pretty huge and it's not homogeneous. For revolutionaries, though, the goal of taking power usually means to seize power from the current ruling class, the bourgeoisie, under the leadership of the proletariat. And that'll mark a huge leap forward in the socialist process towards a classist society. I don't know if we all agree with that here, but generally amongst revolutionaries. Okay. So, does the current struggle for taking power through elections represent a rebirth of the left? Absolutely not. The current rise in popularity of left parties does represent, though, it represents another attempt by the ruling class to shoehorn these like radicals into parties and to sublimate them into these, so they're no longer actually doing radical activities, they're just doing regular old participating in elections in a very legal way, in a very safe way that they can control. The current outpouring of support for the NDP, which is an imperialist, pro-police, pro-pipeline party, actually represents a disconnect from the left with the working class, and especially from native populations too. And at this point in time, working class people, like most of them, are not voting in federal or provincial elections, especially those who are most marginalized. And this isn't because of apathy, which is how the bourgeoisie likes to spin it, and sometimes not even the bourgeoisie, but the left does this too, is they try to spin this as a political apathy, that the working class just doesn't care about, you know, not being able to eat and having austerity cuts to them. And that's not true, and that's most obvious with First Nations people, who, while they vote they have the smallest voter turnout for federal elections, and yet their voter turnout for their First Nations elections are way higher than anything we've ever seen in a federal election. So this isn't about apathy, this is about knowing what can actually change our lives and making a choice to participate in that. Now, one of the questions was, should we set the clock back 100 years to a time when these socialist electoral parties were a lot more relevant and were huge and were taking the world by storm? On the one hand, that's impossible. And on the other hand, we shouldn't be aiming to do that anyways. Those were conditions that were unique to that time. Universal suffrage was this like cool, new, super democratic thing that everybody was excited about, and then it all went to hell. And it's very different today, and we need to accept that it's different today, that elections aren't what they used to be, and we need to move on from there. At this point, encouraging people to vote, we're tailing people. We're dragging them back into the 1900s, and it's a lot easier to do this. It's a lot easier to just participate in these elections because all you do is you join a party and you do what your boss tells you to do. You go door to door, you get people to sign their papers, you tell them to vote. It's a lot harder to go talk to people about their problems, find out where they're at, find out how you can actually solve their problems with them, with their communities, and accomplish that using people's power rather than begging aligned political parties to do that for you. But there have been tons of really good examples of that have happened since and like in the mid to late 1900s. Like the abortion caravan was a fantastic example of that, when hundreds of activists, feminists, marched onto Ottawa, and 30 of them infiltrated Parliament, chained themselves to their chairs, and started giving speeches about how abortion needs to be less restricted. There needs to be less bureaucratic restrictions, less patriarchal restrictions. It needs to not be in the criminal code anymore. And this is the first time that the House of Commons was ever shut down. And this is a great example of using people's power to accomplish something, rather than everybody sending a letter to your MP and hoping that your MP takes pity on you. And then, in 10 years, it all backfires on you anyways because you don't have the power behind it. Elsipogtog was another great example just a few years ago. When a fracking company entered Elsipogtog territory and was trying to screw with the environment there, it wasn't even just the people living on that territory, it was the entire province came together in solidarity with these people, with the warriors who were defending that territory. Meanwhile, against the wishes of the whole province, the party in power is saying, no, 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 we need to let them come in, we need to let them frack this land. And they won. Even though they were attacked by the RCMP, a camp was attacked and raided, and they still won. They chase the fracking company out. So my point is basically no. Let's not pretend that the conditions of any other era is the same as it is today. Let's deal with what we have with today. The next question was, is electoral politics a necessary compromise that we need to make in order to be efficient? So I want to talk about what it means to compromise with electoral politics, because that can mean a couple different things. First off, does it mean that we're making a new party? That we're going to enter into the elections? Because that is the opposite of efficient. That would be all of our time put together here. That would be the rest of our lives. Not only that, but we wouldn't get any airtime, no debate time, no news coverage, 0% chance of winning. I assume we're not talking about that. So the other compromise we could make is we could infiltrate the NDP, which is something I've heard a lot and which people have actually done and failed horribly at, to be frank. And then how do we radicalize it? What was the process there for infiltrating a party? Do we make a radical voting bloc that's so huge we just outnumber the entire rest of the NDP? Do we just find someone who's really charismatic and makes best friends with everybody on the NDP and convinces them to be radical? Or the last option for compromising is we pacify and we depoliticize our movements. I think we can all agree would not be a compromise, that would be a gigantic loss. So none of these things are going to lead us to socialism. None of these options are efficient in any way. So my point is, electoral politics can't substitute for the broad organization of movements from below. And it's not only it can't substitute for that, it's also that it's counterproductive. It's going against where the people are at right now. It's going against what they want right now. It's inefficient, and it's just opportunist. Okay, and lastly, the last topic was the rise of new parties is predicated on frustration with the existing representation, and what does this new shift reveal about the role of electoral politics? So I just want to break down a couple examples of these new parties that we're talking about, and talk about how their rise in popularity, what their rise in popularity actually means. And I want to make a distinction between these people or these parties rising in popularity with the left and then rising in popularity with the bourgeoisie, because those are two very different things. Bernie Sanders, for example, is rising in popularity with the left because they're very disillusioned with Obama and also with Hillary Clinton, even though they're part of the same party, the Democratic Party. But the bourgeoisie is also okay with this happening because it has the tactical purpose of pulling the left support to the Democratic Party. So they've taken all these radicals who might otherwise be out, I don't know, looting the streets. I don't know what it is they do in the States these days. They've taken these people and they've managed to get them to focus their support on one of the two biggest imperialist parties in the United States, because they all like to feel the burn or whatever. I actually thought that was a joke until like a week ago, and I found out it was real. With the NDP, yes, there is a rise in popularity with the left, but there's also a huge rise in popularity with them, with the bourgeoisie, because the NDP is making huge, huge appeals to business. They're opening themselves up to oil companies. They're making subsidies for capitalists. And what they're doing for the bourgeoisie is they're pacifying all these radicals by pulling them into their fold. So yeah, I think I only have like a minute left. So yeah, basically what this reveals, what all these new shifts reveal, is that one, it reveals that we need to be extra careful now of opportunism and reformism. Two, it reveals that the bourgeoisie is actually more worried about what people are capable of now because they're concentrating on trying to divert us into these parties. And third, finally, it means that I believe that the boycott campaign is the correct choice to go for this, that we do need to avoid electoral politics, and that we should be organizing people where they're at, solving their problems in that way, and building ourselves towards a real people's working class revolution.
You're the speaker that has the distinct honor of nailing the time.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
We're under, right?
That was 12 on the dot.
Still, nice.
Great. Yeah, that was great from all of you. Thank you very much. So yeah, we're going to move on to Q&A now. No, the original plan. Sorry?
Was it the responses?
Yeah, but I don't
Sorry,
know.
I'm sorry. Oh, I jumped ahead of myself. Yeah, so each one of you has 3 minutes, I believe. Did I say 3 minutes already?
We can make it 3.
Yeah, 3. How about 3?
Let's do 3.
Cool. So each one of you has 3 minutes to respond to any of your panels. And I think we'll start in the same fashion as last time.
Oh, well, you know, no, I won't say much because I am kind of more curious about what Anne said. I appreciate Madeleine's point of view here in that I really do think that the more important work is the work you do, and the important deal with people who are actual problems. My own experience there is that I encountered institutions who exerted constraints, and so I've been curious about how to remove those institutional constraints by means other than with guns. So, I'm working away at that, don't know how effectively. But that is the puzzle, you know, when you encounter the structural constraints to your work, various forms of passive resistance have their effect, and I think most of it changes pretty slowly. Sometimes the party will make a change that's mildly useful. You know, the Trudeau Liberals got us a capital gains tax, and there was a massive campaign against it on the part of capital and their outraged allies. Right? So, you know, I like the fact that there's a capital gains tax. It was the result of partisan maneuvering. There was no principle involved. But so small things happen that way. Small things happen in the street. Things happen slowly. That's if things happen fast, it often goes very badly, as we said about the Tahrir Square results, not necessarily what was in an attempt to get faster change. What Herb had to say as well, a minor difference that I guess fetishes have their power. And
not afraid.
not in any deep way, but in the sense of imparting your rational meaning to something. I think that is part of what politics does. It imparts an irrational meaning to phenomena that are in part non-rational. I mean, I'm framing it partly the Marx meaning out of it, but partly I think there is something in the notion that that something important happens when human beings attach non-rational meanings to things. And I think we do that with elections as a ritual. A ritual of sociality. Yeah. So I don't spend a lot of time on it. I don't think I would run for public office. I agree that you want to ration your time somewhat on this kind of thing. But it's part of our anthropology, you know. So that's a thoughtful response to what my colleagues said.
No, I'll stop. You know, I would put less emphasis on the symbolic aspect of politics and more on the material aspect.
Yeah.
That is money.
It's maybe we're
Money that is being defended by political parties. Oil, which is the reason someone jokingly said, half tragically said, would the United States be in Iraq if they only produced broccoli?
I know.
It's absolutely true. It was oil.
Yeah.
And therefore I think that behind all this symbolic stuff does lie basic material interests. And that the political parties in the last, since Reagan and Thatcher anyway, maybe before, have all shifted right in the Western world. And by right, I mean that they are more clearly beholden to big money for even running, for the most part. And that I think this is more primary. As far as Madeleine's vision, I can't quarrel with doing everyday movement work. It's always good. It's only when you connect it to the possibility of revolution being built into that right now. I'm afraid I'm much more pessimistic about the state of affairs, the political state of affairs. I think we live politically in the darkest period in my lifetime relative to the chance for political progress. And I'm not even entering climate change into the damn thing. When you enter climate change into the damn thing, it's even beyond the darkest period, because we may, according to many scientists, we may have already gone beyond the tipping point in the climate catastrophe, at which we cannot save ourselves anymore. We can only mitigate the horrors that are going to come. So I must say, also, Madeleine, I hate to act patronizing because I'm older than you are, but what you're going through is very similar to what many of us went through in the 70s. There was a shift from, I'm talking more than 3 minutes, I'm sorry. I'll stop now.
No, you got another minute.
There was a shift from the New Left after the Vietnamese War. So the New Left was mainly anarchist, although they thought they were Marxist. They were mainly lifestyle revolutionaries. My students all had handlebar mustaches a la Zapata. And they used to judge how political you were by how long you stayed up. The ones who could stay up longest. I kid you not. It was very much, as is common in modern youth anarchism, a great deal of lifestyle, moral purity involved, and it burned out. And in the burning out, serious people turned to more serious anarchism. They started blowing things up. Individual terrorism. And then they blew themselves up in New York. Technically very, very true of many anarchists. They didn't know how to make bombs. And then there was the new communist movement that supported the Chinese Revolution. And that new communist movement involved instant revolutionary program in the context of non-revolutionary circumstances. And it involved a lot of nice people who wanted to do good work. And we had 4 or 5 Marxist-Leninist parties in Canada, all of them proclaiming, I'm not talking for a moment, all of them proclaiming that they were the Revolutionary Party. They had no working class connections. They had no constituency other than themselves. They fought and squabbled over small doctrinal differences. And the women got tired of them. The women, as is true of many recently, the women got tired of them. And the women did all the work, of course, which is also very common. And they burned up too. So I have a great deal of mistrust about Marxist-Leninist parties, I must say, at this moment in time in the West. Even though I consider myself a Leninist.
Okay, thank you for, we can, again, pick up some of these ideas in the
Good, I just throw them out.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, so what you were saying before about how left-wing politicians should be using the platform of electoral politics to make speeches of solidarity, I think the biggest flaw in that is that the working class just doesn't care. Like, no matter how left practice of speech you give on TV when you're in an electoral party, nobody's going to care if it doesn't actually impact their lives. And you know, like you had mentioned that these parties, like, we can't actually make real change through elections. So why is it that anyone would care that someone's making a fancy speech and they're basically lying to their faces? And my other point, what you were saying about how small things happen that are good, and that's, I guess, like a defense of electoral politics. Yes, small things happen that are good, but like you were saying, we can't control that. And when we do try to control it, it backfires on us. Like when we, I think it was in the 60s, we voted in the Liberal Party because they promised that they would stop the cuts on Medicare that the Conservative Party was making. We voted them in, and then they made heavier cuts. So none of that is predictable. They lie and they lie and they lie. And once in 1,000 chance something comes out that doesn't screw us over that much. To answer Herb's comments, first off, just about being in a crisis time, like being in a dark time. Being in a crisis is one of, in my opinion, like best times to organize because people are very politically aware of what's going on in their lives and they want to make change about it. Second, I actually know that there used to be 5 ML parties. It's really interesting. But there isn't any longer. There's one, I don't even want to call them ML party. And also, I think you were talking about the ML parties because you were implying that I'm in one. But I'm actually, the Revolutionary Communist Party is actually a Maoist party. Is a Marxist-Leninist Maoist party. And the boycott campaign reflects that with the use of the mass line and connecting to working class people, marginalized people, seeing where they're at, and trying to bring that.
Believe it or not, what's traditionally been called the front group.
Sorry, what's
whether you remember or not, it doesn't change the fact that what you do is a program that was set up by that party. Whether you remember the party is irrelevant. In the history of Marxism, front group, which is not a bad one.
We'll leave the comments until later.
Yeah, what I was saying isn't anything to do with membership. It's that it's not Marxist-Leninist, it's Marxist-Leninist Maoist. That's all I was trying to get across.
I know it's not. We'll talk about that too.
That's all I have to say.
Okay, thanks, Madeleine. Yeah, so we're just, like, the plan is we were going to have a Q&A where I would take 3 separate questions from different people in the audience and then present it to the panelists. But we don't really have enough people to really justify that. So I think what I'll do is, if anyone has pressing questions, I'll answer them, or I'll just take them one at a time. And if it's kind of slow, then we can maybe get together and have a more, a more back and forth conversation, a more vibrant conversation. But yeah, so I'll just open the floor to questions, and I think I saw Brad's hand up earlier than Dave's. Oh, sorry. Whose hand up was first?
I'll try to keep it really short. I guess this is primarily Madeleine, though you two were around, so maybe you can speak to it. I guess the PCRRCP sort of can trace its lineage to on-loop struggle, and I've heard it said that kind of the point where they really lost touch and started to lose their base was in calling for a boycott of one of the Quebec referendums in the 80s. And I guess I'm curious what advantage sort of calling for a boycott explicitly has over a sort of an electoral agnosticism. If the emphasis should be on building the mass party or building people power, why bother to call for an electoral boycott at all?
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, purely the only reason is to capitalize on the fact that during the electoral campaign, elections are, like, people are aware of elections going on, and when an election campaign isn't on, it's really weird to go door-to-door canvassing with people and try and talk to them about elections, and they're like, it was last month, what are you talking to me for? It's more that people are more willing to speak about it with you, and like have conversations, come out to events, talk about, it's more in their minds right now. That's really the only reason, it's just pragmatic.
Yes, and that's my point.
What?
That's what I'm in mind.
It's that this ritual actually provides you with an opportunity to say what you need to say to people. I think it's a good thing to do.
I go further. According to most people, it's the only way. They believe in the legitimacy of the process.
Well, yeah.
To reject it, going on with your symbol, can I answer? Can I talk? Going on with your symbolic argument. The point is, if the guy who's running for the MLS in town, Alan, he's getting pictures in the paper, very usual. And his analysis of what's going on in the world was better than the other three.
Yeah.
But his symbolic world isn't heard.
Yeah.
Is not heard. And he doesn't have it. And he has no troops. He's got that ML group, CPCML, has been in since 1969. The Mounties used to pay a lot of attention to them because they were easy to join. So while there were more Mounties in them than there were members. And one of the major Mounties was given enough money to start a bakery in town.
But CPCML.
That's right.
Oh, really?
That's right. And I'm amazed it still exists. I mean, there's something very peculiar about where it gets its money. But I like what's his name. It's a different issue entirely. But I'm not saying that you're. I don't understand what you mean when you say they're a Maoist party. The Chinese never use the word Maoist. You know that? The Chinese do not say that.
But we're not responding to Buddy's question.
We'll just keep it on topic for longer. So we have the next question over here, I think. And then after that, it will be Gabe, and then back there. So yeah, we'll start with you.
Yeah, maybe I'll just start with maybe a comment, if that's okay. Sure. I think what's come up is sort of historical contingency that's within the left itself, is that it's never remained, it's not static, it's something that's changing over time. And yet, the rhetoric or the language rather that the left uses actually has more or less remained consistent. And so when we use terms like radical, bourgeoisie, these sorts of things, I think once the left has altered its position, and I know the left is a massively broad term, those words are still imbued with a meaning that has a historical meaning that the left has moved past. And so I think that there needs to be a sort of new vocabulary used by the left. Because whenever you hear radical, like for instance, a very simple example of this is the word revolution itself. It's not something that's new, it's actually a return to something. It's what the word literally means, is to return to something, as opposed to evolve. So when we use words like that, we have to actually put them in their context and understand sort of what it is that they specifically mean to people. And perhaps I think that's been left behind a little bit. So the left progresses in its agenda, but hasn't necessarily been up to date with the words that they use to either describe their platforms or their positions. And one question for Madelaine is, you said that the working class, it's not apathy, but rather a bourgeois sort of, how would you?
Everyone knows all politicians are shit.
Pardon?
I said everyone knows all politicians are shit.
Yeah, the thing about apathy was more the blaming people not voting on political apathy is like a bourgeois myth, but it's one that the left also uses frequently as well to try and appeal to the shaping working class and voting, and maybe people as well.
Yeah, and we also had the question about this kind of vocabulary, like, should we be moving to a new vocabulary? And I think maybe if all of the panelists could give their take on that question.
And that was a big question.
Well, it was a comment, but the question was, and do you agree with me?
Yeah, I mean,
So,
yeah, it's open to discussion.
Yeah.
So would it be okay if we do the same, go Shirley, Herb, and Adam?
you could go, yeah. Right. Part of me wants to say, Nick, you're mansplaining here. I mean, in the sense that this is truly something you've thought of, that you've chosen these words because you have views. And so I don't think it's a naive use, if that was your implication, that this was not a thoughtful choice on Madeleine's part. I suspect it comes out of a sincerely held view that these are the true categories of political analysis that make sense of the world. But then I'm probably doing some older woman version of mansplaining now, so I'll stop.
I think there's no such thing.
Anyhow, but I kind of, I was going on record here for poetry, right? I was going on record for, I want people to do political speech that reaches inside you, grabs you, and moves you. And that's probably more why I would use those categories. In a lot of ways, in a lot of purposes, they're very serviceable. Yeah, so I think political vocabulary needs to be refreshed and made vivid to do its work.
The great ones did it.
Yeah.
There's a difference between the language you use within this kind of context, which is an intellectual context, and you can use terms like bourgeoisie, because there is a bourgeoisie, the capital class that runs the economic system. It might have changed in the last 100 years, contours. And what you say, Bernie Sanders last night talked about the control by Wall Street. Of course that's the bourgeoisie. It means the financial sector. But he didn't use the word bourgeoisie because that would kill him politically. So there's a difference between how we talk in all kinds of contexts. In fact, the very, very sophisticated political people, like our Prime Minister, is brilliant at his use of language. That thing about old stock Canadians. It's a racist. That's so brilliant. In the use of the proper language for the right bastard that he is. I wouldn't say that everywhere. It depends on where you are. And therefore, to use language that's appropriate to context is what it means to be alive, and to use it really well is to be very politically sophisticated. To use it in a left-wing way, very sophisticated thing. All the great revolutionaries were highly sophisticated about context of language. And this.
Marx was a master of vitriol.
Vitriol. Trotsky was one of the great orators of all time. I don't know if that answers your question.
It's a response. Thank you. Thank you for it.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing with any kind of vocabulary, is that you change it depending on the context that you're in. But when we're talking about like Bernie Sanders giving a different name to the bourgeoisie, that's just because he's a social democrat reformist, that he calls the bourgeoisie, what do you call it, the billionaire class. Because he wants to move the analysis away from the class and towards this like 1%, or like the rich. Sorry, that's not even rich, it's like mega ridiculous rich versus everybody else. He wants to discourage you from seeing it as, like this class versus this class. That wasn't his worst problem. His worst problem is that he defended American imperialism. And that American foreign policy has not changed with any party in power since 1945. That's more fundamental. Yeah.
That's right. See, because I would vote for Bernie Sanders. I would vote for Bernie Sanders.
Okay.
This is a vote to sell out.
Yeah, like, again, like, if we're going to have like a more vibrant discussion afterwards, we can go into all sorts of topics, but right now we're just sticking to the questions.
So that's language in there, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I don't think it's necessary at all to be changing the like Marxist vocabulary that we're using. People pick it up very easily after the first time you explain it to them. So yeah, sometimes you do need to explain it because we don't all get a Marxist education in elementary school. But yeah, it's as simple as that. Educate your communities and educate other people.
Yeah. I think Gabe had the next question back there.
Yeah. So one of when people ask, I grapple with the question of why bother voting a lot, because I am friends with all sorts of hippie anarchist peoples. That's probably with you all the time. He's my name. But so I think about this question a lot, and one of the responses I use, partially because I believe it and partially because I don't always want to come across as a crazy radical, is that you should vote because harm reduction, immediate harm reduction is of value, and that it doesn't, if we raise the minimum wage by $1 and that's all we get done in the next 5 years, we've made the lives of the poor better. How do you kind of, particularly the one advocating boycott voting, how do we reconcile immediate harm reduction? Because I can understand that electing a liberal party right now might ameliorate the worst excesses of the conservatives, but will in no way further the revolution.
Or even progressive reform.
Or even progressive reform. I just want to move the podium because I didn't know it's speaking. I'm sorry. Can I move it? No, I can't.
Right, so you want to do the same order, or you want to?
Yeah, or we can mix it up a bit. Do you want to start with her, go to Madeleine, and then Shirley?
Well said. Well said. But it's a dilemma. It's a dilemma. Some Trotskyists used to say, we must make things worse in order for the working class to revolt. Of course, that's absolute madness. The question of how to integrate the lessening of harm with a potentially long-range and aggressive program in a society which has never had a revolutionary situation. Or if it had it, it was not like it had it in China or Russia or Cuba. Right? That's a terrible dilemma for the revolutionary left. It's not, I have no answers, but I agree with you. You do not get to people to make you trust a potential progressive platform unless you're willing to fight for the things that they need and want right now. And the electoral system is the only way. And right now, it's not only involved with getting progressive reform, but to get back things that have been taken away from them. Since 1980, there's been a diminution or increase of harm. So that much of what is called the progressive program is only to recapture what's been taken away from ordinary people. And that's sad, true.
So, I loved in Antony's introduction when he used lesser evilism. I thought, I know I am on the left, and we turn a phrase like the lesser evil into a political position, lesser evilism. But it's reformism, I suppose. You know, I may be saying what Madeleine is saying, but the thing is, you don't even know that you're going to get that one measure that's being promised. You really, casting your vote gives you no control over what opposition, the party in power will do. You only have to watch episodes of Yes Minister to know that someone who's earnestly intending to do something when they're elected may find suddenly that they are blocked in some way from doing that. Even if we assume total sincerity, which may be mistaken. But I'd still say vote for the one that makes that promise. Because it's right that in this collective practice, we manage to communicate that a particular piety, even if it's only a piety, be affirmed so that people can be challenged when they fail to deliver on that piety. It's just that those affirmations have to be made on the off chance that some circumstance they may actually make a difference. That's as cynical as I go.
If there's a distinction between the NDP and the Liberals, is that the present moment, the NDP is sincerely going conservative.
Yeah.
The Liberals are incapable of sincerity.
Fair.
Okay, so yes, there's a couple of reasons why I disagree with the like quick harm reduction thing. One of which is that the people most in need of really fast harm reduction is I've never heard it put like that, by the way. That's interesting. Yeah, harm reduction are the most marginalized people in Canada, and they're also the least likely to vote and also the least able to vote. So if you're not just looking at this as an individual choice, but you're looking at this as something to engage in as a leftist, something to go around encouraging people to do, something to build a campaign on, are you really going to go to the poorest neighborhoods, knock on their door and say, hey, I know what you need is really like a lot, like I just don't see how, why would you try and drag these people back into voting when they've already moved beyond that just for some quick fix that you know is going to be turned around in a couple of years anyways, or is never going to be given to them. It's almost like it's just a lie. And yeah, when you are looking at the NDP, like a lot of their reform promises are just straight up lies. Like a lot of their reforms for childcare, for minimum wage, and that are going to take 8, 9, 10 years to go into place. And even then, it's not going to make a change for the poorest people in our societies. So, I mean, in our context right now, we don't even have a quick, like we don't even have a party for quick fixes. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's, you know, now that I think about it, it's actually my own justification for voting. You know, it's the excuse that I'm giving myself in order to put myself in the voting booth.
I think there's a better reason to vote. We've got to get rid of Hopper. I mean, unless one thinks that fascism is impossible again, it's not. Unless one thinks that fascism is not evil enough, given that this whole system is evil, because you make the same argument about Hitler. But there's no question on that Hopper represents fascism. It's crypto, it's quasi-fascism, represents fascism. In the same way in which the right, the quote, ultra-right in the United States represents fascism. In fact, I can imagine in the United States with the government now being paralyzed, and the media calls the paralysis something like it comes out of the sky, both sides. But it's the Republicans who are, and the ultra-right Republicans who are paralyzing government.
Okay.
Since the Pentagon is controlled by neocons, people who don't believe in democracy at all, you could imagine the United States a military coup. That's not unimaginable.
Okay, so we had another question back there. Sorry for taking so long.
No worries. So I'm going to just pause a minute. It's going to seem like I'm singling you out, Madelaine, in this, but the reason is because I think you've articulated the clearest position, right? So in a lot of ways, like, you have the clearest position on what and why, like what we should do with elections and why. So it's not that I'm like attempting to put you in this, but I just want to go back to one thing you said, which was, you talked about the 1969 abortion caravan,
right? And what struck me about that example is that strikes me as a perfect example of electoral politics, right? And what I want to get at is this question of like where we're drawing this distinction between what is electoral and what isn't. Because what you pointed to was they literally changed themselves to the chairs in Parliament. Like, I can think of very few things, probably only voting, which are more connected to parliamentary democracy than that symbolic move, right? And that a number of things that we talk about, like, I think that a number of things that various groups on the left, both sort of those of us who identify as being on the revolutionary left, but also people who see a revolution as a dead end and seek reformist goals, are constantly engaged with elections, right? Like I think about or Adorno has this quote about how even if the reason why you should read philosophers is because even if you're not thinking about philosophers, philosophers are still thinking about you, right? And in the same way, it's like even if you don't think about the state, even if you don't work on the state is still working on you, right? And I think that one of the things that the example of the 1969 abortion caravan shows is this distinction between that which is like extra parliamentary and that which is parliamentary is often blurry. And so I guess like my question is like so much of what we do, whether it's occupying welfare offices, for example, to demand that social services provide raised rates or stop denying people wrongly, whether we attempt to open, if people in the past, including people involved in the new communist movement, open serve the people programs that do things like offer TB testing in poor neighborhoods, right? Like in a lot of ways they're opening with the claim that public hospitals should do this. So they're still making a claim on the rightful role of the state, and often are doing so aimed at decision makers who are elected through elections. So I guess what I'm saying is that there's this issue here where I think that in some ways this involvement in electoral politics can be skewed in this way that you say that like the only thing that's electoral politics is running elections. Whereas I think that a broader view of it is that part of electoral politics is the pressure we put on people who have already been elected or who want to get re-elected, and that something like the 1969 abortion caravan actually represents that. So I guess like my question is one of, at what point do we draw a line of distinction between the two? And how does that line of distinction help us determine what strategies, and therefore what tactics, we can use to build towards revolutionary goals, right? Because I think that distinction has been blurred throughout the conversation.
Okay, so first off, with the abortion caravan, I would make the distinction that it's not engaging in parliamentary politics, even though it was in the House of Commons, is that they weren't going there to participate in the proper forum in the House of Commons, proposing a motion to ask a party if they would change the restrictions on abortion. They went there to illegally shut down the House of Commons, which has never been done before. I don't think it's ever been done since, but I could be wrong about that. Yeah, to me, the difference is that lobbying would be like an individual action done in line with the system of parliamentary politics. What the abortion caravan did was they trekked from one side of the country to another and rallied massive support. They connected to a lot of different people on their way over there by having like these supportive forums around abortion. And then when they did arrive in Ottawa, they did a collective illegal action to force change. They didn't ask for change, they didn't try to lobby for change, they forced it to happen. So yeah, that's the distinction I make there. Sorry, my head got stuck on that and I kind of forgot what you said. Something about radical leftist on campus?
No, it's just a more general question of what, where we draw the distinction between parliamentary. I think you actually answered it. I think you answered it. This is where we draw the distinction between parliamentary and non-electoral action and how that influences our decisions. I think you answered it.
Oh, sorry, there was one other point I wanted to make. I think it's also that it wasn't like a partisan action. It wasn't like, I don't even know what party was in at that point, to be honest, but it wasn't like, conservatives, you're doing like these horrible things with abortion, like you're out NDP or liberals, like let's get them in power, they'll do what we want. It was like a nonpartisan action against the government.
Yeah, no, I think that very useful point made, Chris, and I think we find over and over again in sort of the institutional politics, things like, trying to get more money for universities. We hear that public opinion is what's driving the anti-university cutback kind of thing. And while I think we know that public opinion is not necessarily mass public opinion, it's also true that a lot of working people voted for Mike Harris in the 1990s in Ontario, that there is working class conservatism, often based on, a proper envy of the benefits that privileged people enjoy, and wanting to take those away. Fair enough. I mean, I understand where that comes from, but yeah, no, I do kind of see the work of election campaigning as being in a continuum of the larger processes of political conversation. And I still think, oddly, this is my last vestige of idealism, is that I really think that anything that we do that's collective must be embraced and celebrated, so.
Not like Golden Dawn.
Okay, not like Golden Dawn. In Italy, not anything, but fascism. I'm almost there insofar as, I have a bit of an envy for the way the right mobilized so broadly in the 90s. Right? How'd they do that? I want to know how they did that. And do it for a better cause.
Use the ring of power.
Look, it almost felt like that, didn't it? Holy crap, why are they getting so much? Why are people voting against their obvious investments?
On a note of optimism, the people, in terms of the people in general, relative to what we consider progressive reform, are to the left of almost all leadership, even of left leadership. And the NDP, the membership of the NDP is to the left of leadership. I went to a constituency meeting of the NDP, and we passed all kinds of progressive policy for the conference that never came up at the conference. Because the NDP is run by an oligarchy in the back room, and it's professional experts, like almost all bourgeois parties. I'm that way. I have no real answer to your question because I really don't know what is to be done in a revolutionary way at this moment. But I do know what can be done, what must be done in a reform way. And that is, we have to deal with the climate crisis. Using Mao, if you ask what is the principal contradiction in present-day society, is it between the capitalists and the working class? Is that the principal political condition? Or is the principal contradiction between the people and the fossil fuel industry? Because that's where, I was in a march with 400,000 people in New York on the car. It shocked us. Supposedly we could get 100. We got 400,000 people. That doesn't mean the flow from it is going to stop the fossil fuel industry. Don't get me wrong. But that's an enormous advance. And I do think part of the ruling class, which is why I say that part of the ruling class inevitably has got to stop worrying about its grandchildren. They know perfectly well that there's no future even for its grandchildren. They can't hide in the dugouts of the Colorado mountains as they did with nuclear. Do you know that the ruling class had special places to hide? We had one in DeBert, where the ruling class would go after the nuclear war. And they took their property certificates with them so that when they come out and said Ford is mine after the nuclear war. They can't do that with climate change. And that means we're going to have a split in the ruling class. We're having it now. Maybe not, but that's what I'm part of the environmental movement pushing in that. I say, shut down the tar sands. 10,000 of you should go and lay down there. So the kids ready. That's what you should be doing. Simple.
Yeah. Oh, Shiva, great.
I had a comment which kind of actually pulls out of electoral issues, referring back to one of your framing comments regarding capitalism and modernity, but I also have a question regarding the Marxist-Leninist Party and the role it plays in the elections. So I don't know if there's time for those attributes. But anyway, so Herb, you said, and I know we talked about this before, and that you talked about how we tend to romanticize feudalism, which is quite correct, and you talked about the benefits, the creativity of capitalism, as it has been called, and how. And I know there are lots of big fat volumes which justify this claim, which back up, support this claim that the so-called benefits that we're enjoying with modernity is due to capitalism. But I remain unconvinced, because as far as I can tell, humanity has always made wonderful things, created great artworks, made great inventions, without the so-called benefit of capitalism. And I want to de-link, because we're always supposed to be so grateful for the benefits that capitalism has conferred upon us, like this amazing healthcare that we are all enjoying. These are what I see is this unbridled consumption, which certainly is a product of the capitalist and consumerist times. But I just want to focus on that statement, because we do hear that a lot in our schools, right? Like we grow up with this idea that these folks, well, aren't we lucky that we're living with all these benefits of capitalism? And I don't know how valid that, or how validated it is. So that's one question I have outside of that, and this is, I think, a continuing discussion that we've had before. But the other thing is, I just found myself curious about, I was so surprised to see there's a Marxist-Leninist Party and in Halifax, and I can actually vote for them, and I like the idea that people are confronted with those two words on that voting thing. When they go to vote, they're going to say, and I like the idea that school children, they are forced to teach school children about Marxist-Leninist because it's there, right? So I think that is of value. I mean, okay, it's very theoretical, but I like the idea that they have to, they tell them a bunch of myths, actually. My daughter comes home and says, yeah, Marxists are really unfair people because they believe surgeons should be paid the same amount as street cleaners. And I'm like, And that is what they are taught in school, right, by their social studies teacher, because they have to tell them something, because they have to explain. They have they have to explain those four positions. So, but I think it is a value, right? So maybe if we get that education part right, if we get that education and awareness part right, which we obviously haven't, maybe there is a place. And what would happen? Hypothetically, it's possible, it's not probable, that the Marxist-Leninist Party wins, right? It is a possibility, albeit a very, very slim one. What would happen then, right? What?
CIA?
Can we imagine that? Can we open a place in our imagination for
you have
that?
communist parties winning elections and places.
There you go. I mean, the world didn't come to an end, did it, right? I mean, people got really excited and danced in the streets.
Lenin turn over in his mausoleum.
Yeah.
Because they had nothing to do with it. And Mao's sitting Mao's body sits in a glass case in Beijing.
We started this panel by mentioning the wins of the communist parties right now, right here, right in our modern times right now. So, I mean,
can I try your first question?
Okay, yeah, let's rewind back to capitalism.
I'm sorry, I didn't articulate my argument precisely. All I meant was that capitalism was the first system that introduced industrialization. I really think that industrialization has created the conditions by which a minority has lived in a way which is unthinkable in the past. And it's created the conditions under which, if we had socialism, then people would live in a way which is so marvelous, from each according to their ability to each according to their need. That's marvelous. The epigram still holds, and that's still a model. One has to have a theoretical model of our future in order to do anything, it seems to me. Yeah. And that model, although Marx always said, I don't want to go into it in detail, because then you become kind of utopian. Of course, he set forth something which I always talk about what's going to be like after the revolution. Are we going to have families? Yeah. Are we going to live together for all of our lives? Are we going to have free love? All those things are very interesting questions, especially for the young.
Yeah.
We have that view, and it's all these views are product of the industrialization and the science behind it. After all, the French Revolution not only created the possibility of science, it also created the possibility of rational intelligence controlling the world. That's a revolutionary idea compared to what was before.
Yes.
You know, so that's what I'm defending.
Yes.
I'm defending, not capitalism.
But not
itself.
capitalism,
No,
right?
capitalism is indefensible.
We can agree that we cannot take it for granted that the modern standards of living that
the
we're
media does it all
enjoying.
the time.
Okay.
You're
Right. Thank you.
I think it is. Right.
Are there any other panelists who'd like to take a get out of that?
You just said the first one. Yeah, in that case, yeah. I want to talk about, you were talking about education.
Yeah.
How you thought that if kids had a better education, it would lead them more towards Marxism. Or Marxism-Leninism. Like maybe, but education in Canada, like public schools, they are a tool of the ruling class, and that education is framed that way for a reason. If ever kids were taught about Marxism, like I wasn't even taught that existed. The fact that
well, they have to be because they mimic the voting process. So they see those words, so they have to be given an explanation of what Marxist-Leninist is because there is a Marxist-Leninist party running right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. But also,
so it's not like they want. It's like it's already part of the structure, basically. But they have to provide some kind of, because they're going to ask, okay, this is the NDP, this is the what's Marxist? What do they stand for? They stand for surgeons getting the same wages as street cleaners. Isn't that awful? Right? This is actually what they're being taught, but they have to say something, right?
Yeah. I also think though that education also isn't enough to convince people to like support the Revolutionary Party. Like they need to be seeing it in action, and when it comes to the CPCML, there isn't a whole lot of action to see. So yeah, I don't know. I don't really agree with that strategy as achieving socialism.
I don't know. But I was happy to see.
Yeah, it's better than total erasure. I think it's almost the same as total erasure. but at least, at least when there's a big fat honking lie out in public, when there's a big fat honking lie out in public, you've spoken often of the problem of lying in politics. I think human beings have enough moral sense left that actually is offensive. And the political work that you and others do to say, excuse me, that's actually not true, is to some extent facilitated just by the fact that, that puts it out there. I worry most about in our current worrisome Harper government about the hiding of things and the erasure of things, the lack of data, this worries me. What's good about what you do is, you're giving people an alternative perspective. They'll sort it out if you don't do it or not. But it's really important that there be something compelling that's different. Different thoughts.
You spoke about capital gains. I'm pretty sure.
I was just going to say, really, you're going to talk about capital gains tax here? Because I will.
Capitalism has sort of has benefited us in terms of medical advancement and that sort of thing. But of course, that can only be true in a sort of global context. Because capitalism in a contained environment wouldn't necessarily have given us those benefits. It was obviously necessarily contingent upon extractive economies from the 19th century, 19th century, 15th century. So when we're moving into stakes seem to be getting higher and higher and higher, particularly with the things like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And I just wonder, as it feels like we're almost reaching a precipice where we might not be able to come back from, not only in terms of the environment, which, as you say, is a lot of scientists say there may not be any coming back from things, but just politically and economically, I'm wondering if we've reached a point now in the sort of global capital system where the stakes are so high. And again, I don't really know how to articulate the question. It seems like that harm reduction question that was asked. Is it so bad now that we have to vote, or is it so bad that we can't vote? And it's a conundrum.
Well, what you're saying could be said slightly differently. Things gone so far, nothing can be done to stop it. You know what? There's no way of definitively answering that question in the negative. Yeah, yes, it's gone too far. Therefore, we always live and must act. Anyway, therefore you do what you can. Nothing more. What you can is always determined by your context and connections and everything else. For example, I would say that Madelaine works according to a conceptual outlook that says that there's a working class that is politically relevant. I would say there is no politically relevant working class within North America in the progressive sense at this moment. And that doesn't mean we wouldn't build one. If there were not for climate change, of course, I'd say let's build that working class to do what Marxism said it must do. Given the fact that we don't have time, it's unprecedented not to have time. That's what changes everything. Marxism was based upon the idea that there's time, and with time, capitalism must be transformed. I believe that's true. We don't have it. So what do? We have to even support them if they're willing to bring in green energy, if they're willing to not subsidize fossil fuels, if they make electric cars with solar energy to make, if they'll do that, I'll support capital. Here I'll talk about Lenin. I will support the devil if it's necessary to do things.
That's a good closing line as far as I'm concerned.
You too would support the devil?
Yeah, I mean,
I didn't think you would show that. I think you suffer from Sheffield integrity.
I think that's the last word, but Madelaine may have something she wants to add.
I'm not really sure what you were saying about the working class. I don't know how that had anything to do with the question.
There is not an organized, progressive working class, even as a sector.
Yeah, but what did that have to do with the question?
Of elections?
Are we too far along?
It has everything to do with what I said earlier, how bad things are relative to this overwhelming problem of climate change. If it wasn't for climate change, I'd do what I've done all my life, which is I would do what you're doing, which I have great respect for, which is to attempt to make the working, or to help the working class realize its revolutionary potential. And it's the only class that does have that, has a long historical thing. It's their own destiny. I didn't like that word.
You just said there's no working class, though.
I said there's no working class as a political.
Okay, that's like politically conscious.
Yes.
Okay, you got me confused.
Of course there's a working class. The working class is larger than ever.
Okay.
Because the concentration and centralization of wealth has increased, as Marx predicted.
Okay. Yeah, in the case of climate change, I agree absolutely that we've reached like a crisis point in climate change, or maybe past it. But my answer to that would then be that we need to make revolution even faster then. Like, we need to be getting down to the brass tacks and like making real revolution happen. Because we know if we look at the last century, getting reformists into power doesn't work because reform is a lie. And capitalism directs them right back to where they came from. even if these reforms do go into play, a couple of years later, they're going to be taken back again because it's going to be profitable to take them away.
I stand almost alone in the Marxist left at this present moment in history, that I actually contend with the most important Marxist journal in English. It's called Monthly Review. Because it's writing now and finding out that Marx was a great environmentalist. It's unsurprising at all. It's a great genius. And that therefore, and that Marx has proven to us that if we don't overthrow capital, we can't solve the environmental crisis. Logically, that's impeccable. Capitalism created the environmental crisis. In order to really get rid of it, we need socialism. But what if there is no socialist movement to do it in time? And we don't have time. Then what do you do? What if there isn't time to really build your revolutionary communist party?
But what is the alternative then?
The
Is to get the
alternative is-
reformists into power who are going to lie? Then
No,
we're just back to where we started.
No, I say to appeal to people's human instinct, human predisposition to not want to have the species disappear.
Wish for social control. Sorry, last word.
Of course, control always comes into it. And an analytic concept, it's always a problem of control. But it means to control the political process to the point at which capital tries to save itself from itself. Which means it's most destructive, because it'll make money any way possible, including destroying the species. That's what, you think the fossil fuel people don't know about climate change?
Yeah.
Of course they know. What keeps them going? What keeps those idiots going? That their own children and grandchildren are going to die from what they're doing. The answer to that. And I don't know.
Profit.
Of course, it's more than profit. It's the accumulate, said Moses in the prophets. Marx. It's more than profit. It's the continual accumulation of wealth for its own sake. It's an amazing system. Amazing system. It's relentless. And if some of them do that to make green energy, if some of them do that to get politicians into power that don't subsidize. Right now, our government subsidizes these fossil fuel industries. I'll vote for a party, even if they're right. I'll go further. If that party is anti-working class, but they will do this, I'll support them.
Okay, I'm going to give Madelaine or Shirley the last word. If either of you have something else to say, then to wrap it up, then go ahead.
Was your question answered? I kind of lost track.
There were 16 answers. I hope you've satisfied one.
Did you want to go ahead?
No.
Just wrapping up.
I'm going to vote. I think Megan Leslie individually stands for some good human values, but I don't have any optimism that she'll transform my world. I'm afraid I'm a deep gradualist, which will not satisfy me.
You're not that deep. If you're a deep gradualist, you think the NDP might do something.
So, yes, what I was going to say was, if anybody wants, there's a bunch of articles back there about the boycott if you want to read more about it. There's also magazines full of articles. They cost money, but you can also get them for free online. So, but yeah, October 18th is the day of action for the boycott campaign. So keep your eyes open on the internet to see what happens in Canada. And yeah, thanks for hosting this class.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. There's not many people.